Rochester, how you feeling? They got a war for order, a war for gold, a war for money, and a war for souls. War on terror, war on drugs, war on kindness, war on hugs, war on birds and a war on bees. They got a war on hippies trying to save the trees. War with jets and a war with missiles. War with how I see the government officials. Wall Street, war on high finance, war on people who just love to dance. War on music, war on speech, war on teachers and the things they teach. A war for the last 500 years.
There are so many voices in this country that are speaking up, and active people active in their communities, that I'm not talking about a fringe minority or a silent majority, but the silenced majority, silenced by the mainstream media. The media today represents a minority elite. These all have to be challenged, and many people are doing it.
It's Michael Franti here.
This is Amy Goodman with
Rochester Indymedia.
Hi, I'm Dawn Zuppelli, the Barefoot host with Rochester Indymedia's IndyTV, and today we have a really exciting program. We're talking to Steve Kurtz from Buffalo, co-founder of Critical Art Ensemble and a tenured professor in the visual studies at SUNY Buffalo. So we're going to get into a very intense 4 years that Steve Kurtz has lived through, and it's a lot of information to take in, and we're going to begin with a little bit about Critical Arts Ensemble. Just what is Critical Arts Ensemble and the work you were doing that eventually raised suspicion to the government. Hi, Steve. Welcome to Rochester.
Thanks very much. It's good to be here. Oh man, what were we doing? We were doing way too much, because for the past 20 years we've been involved in radicalized interventionist work and finding ways to kind of restructure our awful political situations through cultural means. And for the past 4 years or so, we had been working primarily in anti-war activity. And at the time that I had my introduction to the FBI, we were working on a project called Marching Plague. And basically, we were trying to show people the futility of germ warfare, which is so much of what interventionist work is about, right? That a mythology is put up that gets into people's mind. In this case, that germ warfare is really an effective weapon. Terrorists could use it. We're under threat from it every day. It gets in there, and then we have to go the other way, of take it away from this mythology that fits into the society of fear and is completely broken from the real, and reground the image the public has in the materiality of the real. How do we bring them back down to that and make them think about germ warfare the way it really is a completely failed weapon system that almost every military in the world has unplugged and doesn't want to go back to. And probably the only reason that Bush has gone back to it, although he's never met a weapon system he doesn't like, but probably the only reason he's come back to it is because it does arouse so much fear, right? That it makes people's imagination run wild.
So this is art that isn't, I mean, it's complicated ideas, and it's not color and painting. So when people see it, these are materials that people aren't familiar with as art. So talk about some of these
well,
materials.
the way we work is very hybridized. So it does have elements of theater and art in a traditional sense, and traditional materials and design. It's completely recognizable in what we do. But where it gets confusing is we build in other discourses from the social science, from history, from political science, from sociology, and then from the hard sciences as well. We use a lot of life science materials, processes, and techniques. And when they start getting all mixed together, it's like, well, is this science, or is this activism, or is this art? What is going on here? So it's that hybridization that can sometimes confuse people as to what it actually is.
So let's talk about how the government became aware of the art finally that you were doing, and going back 4 years now to this very tragic day in your life when your wife of 20 years, Hope, had stopped breathing and you called the paramedics. Is that when you would say the beginning point was? And can you talk about that?
It could have been. We're really not sure, and we'll address that in a second, but just as kind of a preface, it could have been because a lot of the work we were doing attracted a lot of authorities. I mean, there has pretty much been no form of authority that Critical Art Ensemble has not had problems with.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Whether it's police, the church, politicians, lawyers, corporate lawyers to be specific, whatever you can think of the disciplinary apparatus. We haven't met a social worker yet. Maybe that's the only one we've avoided at this point. So, the FBI could have gotten started looking at us at any time. We could have gotten on their radar at any time. But when we know we got on their radar was at this tragic event when, I found my wife dead, that she had stopped breathing. And it began, I called the police. Well, I called the paramedics, and the paramedics brought the police with them, which is standard procedure when a 45-year-old woman dies in her house. Mm-hmm. That's immediately kind of considered suspicious, and probably well should be, especially given rates of domestic violence. And so there's reasons. I'm kind of forgiving towards Buffalo police. But anyway, they arrived, and what they saw down the hall from the bedroom where my wife died was my home lab. Now, SUNY doesn't give us a studio or a laboratory. We have to make our own space, and lots of people use their homes, as I was doing. And they saw this laboratory and became convinced that I had probably murdered my wife through the use of bacteria, which I had on hand. It was all non-pathogenic. It couldn't even make someone sick, let alone kill them. And I tried to explain this to them, and that I was a professor whose specialty was in the intersection of art and science. But they found it far more plausible that I was doing something nefarious with this scientific equipment, in spite of the fact I could show them, here's the work, here's where I've done it at museums around the world, here are catalogs, here's books I've written. Still, they're unconvinced, and I had to spend most of that afternoon being interrogated as a murder suspect.
Did they take is that when did the charges come out, and did they take
Well, that wasn't, they left. They were, at the end of the day, they were satisfied enough that they weren't going to arrest me for anything. But on the way out, they said, we think the FBI is going to need to talk to you. And sure enough, the next day, as I was leaving my house, this is the 12th, so I was leaving my house to go to the funeral home to make arrangements for Hope, up screeching 3-4 cars of FBI agents come jumping out, and I was taken into soft detention. I was basically kidnapped. And obviously not Mirandized, not charged with anything, and only it was a soft rendition. They didn't fly me to Guantanamo or strip me and give me a suppository sedative and whisk me off. I didn't have to do it that way. They just took me to a hotel where they kept me and interrogated me, and then the next day took me to FBI headquarters when my lawyer finally got me out.
And when did these charges then?
Well, the charges they had a variety of charges they were looking for. In the beginning, they were looking for a murder charge as well, and also terrorism charges.
Bioterrorism?
Bioterrorism, to be specific. And as soon as they had me whisked away, they scrambled 5 offices of the FBI, the Joint Terrorist Task Force, Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, of course the local sheriff's department and police. So around my house is just this massive raid. They cordoned off the whole block, told the neighbors that there could be dangerous germs, and most of the neighbors. And
your neighbors have been really supportive, and so
yeah, the neighbors were. But first, it's Allentown. No one likes cops there. So. So they were very suspicious of what they were being told right away, and yeah, right off there were signs in neighbors' yards saying, he's not a terrorist, he's my neighbor. But so that's what they were originally going for. They really thought they could put together some kind of terrorist case, and they had great motivation for that.
Okay, when we come back, we're going to talk about the details of what they tried to charge you with when they couldn't, with the bioterrorism charges, and how the case went, and kind of what's next for Critical Arts. So we're going to show some clips of Strange Culture. Yeah. It's a docudrama. Is that how you'd call it?
Yeah.
And
it's a hybrid documentary of some.
It's part
doc, part docudrama.
So we'll show some interviews from that film, and stay tuned to IndyTV. Thanks.
Is identify things that we think are counter to the advancement of social justice, and then we try to do something about it. And we try to do something about it on a cultural level.
The Critical Art Ensemble has focused on the ways that the government, the military, science, and industry have often come together in ways that do not do the public any good.
It would be more in the Critical Art Ensemble philosophy, I think, not to just tell people what they should be thinking, but rather alert people that these decisions have been made and the risks involved, and then give people an experience.
It's not what people normally think of as art. We make art that questions the relationship between art, commerce, and biotechnology. Sometimes we do installations, sometimes photography, you know, whatever it takes. Altogether, we've written 5 books. We've had several international museum exhibitions.
Back with IndyTV, talking to Steve Kurtz, founder of Critical Art Ensemble and professor at SUNY Buffalo. And we're just getting into the trial, what happened after you were being charged or potentially charged with bioterrorism charges. What happens next?
Well, you know, where we left off is the motivations that the FBI had for this case. And they were very interested in getting a terrorism charge of some type, and the reason is because of past history of Buffalo and what had been done there primarily by the prosecutor at that time, the U.S. Attorney Michael Battle. And you know, Battle, his I guess first foray into infamy was the Benjamin Banata case, and that was one where he colluded with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police to have a man kidnapped whose only crime was he was Algerian and knew how to fly a plane. Held him for 5 years in New York State. He was tortured. At least he claims that he was tortured during that time. Yeah, and this isn't in Guantanamo. This is right here in New York. Right? And then at the end, when lawyers finally got him out, the FBI said he's not guilty of anything. We have nothing on him. Battle tried to hold him longer after the man had been kidnapped by saying he was in violation of immigration statutes. So then he went to the Lackawanna 6 case, one that's quite famous and a very dubious one at that, here. And this is where it all came down, because when he pulled that one off and President Bush could get on TV and say, oh, we have a terrorist cell and a sleeper cell and it's been found in Lackawanna, New York. And well, you know, all the agents and prosecutors got medals and got to go to the White House, and you know, the Buffalo FBI got this huge infusion of money because obviously the terrorists were everywhere in Buffalo and they needed to be rooted out, and the border between Canada and Buffalo needed to be guarded better. And most significantly was Michael Battle got promoted to being #2 in Washington, D.C. In the Department of Justice, right? He was right under Gonzales. And this was not lost on any U.S. attorney anywhere. They all knew that if you want to get on the fast track, you make a terrorism case. So when my case came along, they were like, here we go, here's case #2.
And so you needed to pull out the big guns. So you had Paul Cambria, who
I needed to pull out the big guns, is
Larry
right.
Flint and Marilyn Manson, and now what was his approach and how did that affect your case? Without him, maybe it would have went differently. It
could have gone very horribly badly, and thank you to the ACLU who arranged getting Paul to defend me. Yeah, well, you know, Paul comes at it full blast, and yeah, he doesn't pull any punches, and he has a great research team, and they really just figured out how to break the back of this argument, which was fairly simple to do, because. And this is the real meaning of this case, why it is so important, just beyond, you know, you don't want to see innocent people go to jail, but what it means socially and politically was what eventually the prosecution and the FBI decided to do, because they couldn't get a terror charge. They charged me with mail fraud. And the enhanced under the U.S. Patriot
Act?
It was enhanced,
meaning
yeah.
What you were facing were really huge charges for something
they're
like a
very
mail fraud.
huge.
What does that mean? It's not really a big charge.
Yeah, it used to not be. It used to be a 1 to 5 year charge. Now it's a 20-year charge since the Patriot Act. It's one of the things that's not talked about enough in the Patriot Act. You know, we usually come and talk about the invasion of privacy and such like that Act does, but we miss something very important, and that it just put draconian sentences onto all of these different charges and just really upped the prosecution's power and leverage because of these huge, I mean, bigger than the Rockefeller laws. I mean, they're dropping charges to go from 5 to 20 years. It's, you know, it's ridiculous. So it's pretty scary when you're looking at that.
And you had a co-defendant in this.
I did. I had a co-defendant, Bob Farrell. They really had to indict him because they had to make it kind of a conspiracy to add to the criminal aura of it. But the precedent they were trying to set is they were trying to say that there is no distinction between the civil and criminal branches of law. Right? They were trying to get me on mail fraud by saying Bob and I had broken a material transfer agreement when Bob sent me some bacteria. And if that was the case, which apparently we didn't break any law there, but if we had broken this agreement, the proper remedy would be for the supplier and the university to sue us and take their product back. Right? That's what should have been done. But instead, the Justice Department said, you know what, we can probably do this as a criminal case, over $256 worth of bacteria. They were totally outside their guidelines to do this. They thought we could do this as a criminal case, and if we pull this off, if we set this precedent, it means arbitrarily, anytime there's a contract dispute that involves mail or wire, we can drop this 20-year charge on people. In other words, they would have the perfect law to go after anyone they wanted. Anybody. I mean, the activist community would be in serious, serious trouble, because who gets through life with no contract disputes ever? And it would have been written in a way that, say you just filled out a warranty card wrong and mailed it in and then tried to claim on that warranty card. They could now say that that's fraud.
So not only did they not persecute under the fullest extent, but they didn't get any charge. Like, it was totally, you were fully exonerated. Talk about.
I was, yeah. And after 4 years, after 4 years of struggling and numerous hearings and having to be on probation for a year and a half, that was something I didn't know. That once you're indicted, you're in the system and you go directly over to the marshals. I thought you had to be actually proven guilty first, but apparently no. If a grand jury says you're guilty, you are guilty in the eyes of the law until you can prove yourself innocent. And
so how
that
was
took
your
4 years.
Support system and people, you were being so criminalized here, and were they seeing you like, oh, he's the security terrorist?
No, I never had any trouble from anyone. The support system was great. I mean, so many people came from around the world to my aid. Lots of money was given so I could pay my lawyers. I had a great defense fund. I had a great media team that did it all voluntary. I had a great defense fund that was all done on a voluntary basis. And just thousands of supporters, and so it was really easy to continue on. It gives you a lot of courage when you have that.
And the precedent, what does the precedent victory represent now?
Well, the victory, it went the other way, is that happily for us, the judge says you cannot use mail fraud in this way. All of the ways they tried to say mail fraud applied to civil cases, he struck down. So that particular type of abuse is now clearly on record, that the FBI, Department of Justice, cannot use it that way. So that's really the big victory for the progressive community. And the smaller victory is I didn't have to go to jail.
Well, yes, we're happy about that. That's terrific. And we're going to talk more about what's next for your life, your projects, other artists, and people who are experiencing these, excessive charges under these, times in the administration. When we come back, you're watching IndyTV. I'm the Barefoot host with Steve Kurtz. Stay tuned.
Hi, I'm Peter Coyote. I'm an actor. And I'm speaking today for Robert Farrell, who was the former chair of the Department of Human Genetics at the Pittsburgh Graduate School of Public Health. I'm speaking for him because for a variety of reasons, he can't speak for himself. These are his words. From the beginning of the whole affair, I felt that I was simply collateral damage. From the start, the FBI seemed to have been interested in Steve's politics. I got the impression that they were against the activities of the art ensemble and Steve, and they were out, this was a way to get him. Steve has an idea that they want to frighten anyone, including scientists, who question what go on in this country. I don't think I did anything wrong. I would do the same thing again with Steve or anyone if they wanted reagents and they were serious people that convinced me that they were doing all this for educational reasons. That's the whole point, to educate the public about what is going on in science today. If I've broken any law as far as Steve's concerned, I've broken it 1,000 times because I've had many people in my lab to learn these techniques and given biological reagents to many students to work with. Genetically modified foods inserts genes from one kind of plant or animal into another, using viruses as a carrier. We have no idea what the long-term repercussions of these transplants are going to be. Genetically modified foods are not labeled. You can't go into a supermarket and find out that the milk you're drinking has bovine growth hormone in it, or that the tortillas you're buying are made with genetically modified corn, or that the soy you're buying has been made with genetically modified soy. So all the citizens of the United States have been turned into unwitting experimental victims of a mass marketing industrial phenomenon which has no regard whatsoever for their health.
I want to talk about, a reporter asked you, and I don't know if you can remember exactly, but it was very eloquent. They said, what would you want to say, you know, now that this is over?
Right.
Do you have any comments to either say to the court or, you know, people? And you said something really beautiful, I thought. Do you remember?
Yeah, well, there's a couple of big comments like that. But the first one and the answer for that is, you know, as kind of a human being, where do I go to get the 4 years of my life back that the Department of Justice took from me? Kind of as a taxpayer, where do we go to get the millions of dollars that were wasted on this case, and clearly wasted on this case? Where do we get that back and actually put that towards something worthwhile that actually is in the public interest? And, you know, the final part is, as a citizen, where do I go to get a Department of Justice that is not thoroughly corrupt with partisan politics, that isn't working off an ideological agenda, but really cares about the public interest and wants to focus on real crises and crime? So that's the first one. The second one is that for me to get through this case, it took tens of thousands of supporters, hundreds of thousands of dollars, right? One of the best legal teams in New York, a crack press team, right? 4 years of my life and total innocence. And with that, I carved off a little slice of American justice. And what in the end that means is that almost everyone in the system is not getting justice. Because how many people can do that? And it's practically none.
And how can you inform others who maybe are going through something like this or will be going through this, like what lessons you've taken out of this when something, you know, when the state comes against you so strongly and they have the media on their side and so many other tools? How do you resist, and what can people do who maybe don't have as much support? What lessons?
Well, there's the basic lesson for someone that doesn't have support is do not talk to the FBI or to the police or to anyone. Never, always take your right to remain silent, no matter what they say, no matter what happens to you. If you're rendered, whatever it is, don't talk. That's the most important thing. And where they are most likely to find the bogus charge is when you say something. Because if they can twist it into a lie, lying to an FBI agent is a felony. And they will certainly do it, and then that's the charge that they'll bring. So never say anything. Don't be foolish and think like, well, this is all a mistake, and if I just explain this, it'll all go away. It's not going to go away that way. In fact, if you talk, it's only going to make it worse, and no matter what you say, you're digging a deeper hole. So do that and get a lawyer right away. Take your second right. I want a phone call. I want a lawyer.
Are people contacting you for help with this now? Are you seeing this more and more with other artists or just activists or people who want to
People do contact us upon occasion, and yeah, and there's been some solidarity efforts as well, and because, you know, unfortunately this is starting to spill over, and we're seeing these kind of problems in Spain and Germany, in England. And so we have had some solidarity efforts with people, particularly academics, that find themselves in the exact same position on just this crazy charges.
And do you feel like really now free, like you're not under the eye? Are you worried about any backlash or any continued surveillance from here on out?
Well, I mean, there's always going to be an open record on me, but I mean, I'm not particularly worried about it, because in order to do, I mean, very strong and I would say explosive work at this point, you don't have to go outside the law, right? It doesn't require it at this point, because, you know, with current Bush policy of, you know, please report anything suspicious, right? And we hear it in the airport, we hear it on TV and the threat level, and if you see anything strange, you know, that's pretty simple to do. you know, we could probably walk outside the studio right now and see something strange or weird. And in the end, that's what the security state is trying to protect us from and steer us toward, right? Of making this very narrow level of behavior. And as, you know, cultural interventionists, it's to fight that. Because they're not protecting us from terrorists. They're protecting us from things that are weird.
And just, this is a big question. I don't know if we have tons of time for it, but the biggest biotech issue that we face as a society right now, and how do you propose we address it? Or is that something you're still really concerned working on?
Well,
right
yeah,
now?
no, we'll continue. Like I said, right now we're on anti-war, but in that, you know, the part of war that we're discussing is one that intersects with the life sciences. So that is one of concern. Whether that's the biggest issue, probably not from the point of view of biotech. From the war, it's something very significant.
Do you feel you have to be a lot more cautious? Are you censoring
well,
yourself now with
no,
anxiety?
and you know, here's something that I say to everybody in the audience: is please do not censor yourself. This is the time where we have to go further, you know, because our rights aren't going to stay there if we do not stay and struggle for them. And right now, they're in very serious jeopardy. As we all know, we are in constitutional crisis. So more than ever, this is not the time to self-censor. This is the time to be determined and motivated and move forward in the most aggressive way possible.
And how are you doing that? What's next for you now as an individual with the Critical Art Ensemble?
The next project we're working on is a project to try and expose the mythology of the dirty bomb, which Ashcroft introduced to try and make the Jose Padilla case much more scarier than it actually was. And that there's kind of this image that's been set in the public imagination that if you have some C4 and a little bit of radioactive material and you put it in a suitcase, it's going to blow up and cause all of these problems, which is scientifically ridiculous. I mean, it just has no bearing on reality whatsoever. And all of this of calling it the poor man's nuclear bomb. I'm sorry, you know, a little suitcase with a little bit of radioactive material and some explosives is not like a nuclear weapon.
This and you're going to be okay?
Well, we go into the labs to do, you know, and we can do simulations with radiation of what would actually happen. And then, you know, what we have to do is then figure a way to make a theater so people can be attracted into it to discuss through this issue and to inject enough skepticism that they're going to be open-minded enough to go, okay, maybe a dirty bomb doesn't exist. I mean, the fast way is you can look at our own regulatory agencies for radiation and atomic engineering, and they say quite explicitly that a dirty bomb, well, it's not really a weapon of mass destruction. It's kind of something we made up. You know, if someone were to die from one, they would die from the explosives, not from the radiation.
Well, we're looking forward to what you do in Critical Art Ensemble now that all this is behind you. And congratulations, and you taught through it all.
Thank you.
That's amazing. And you have such a great spirit and energy and sense of humor.
Well,
and
they're not going to break it. Hope was like that. She is militant. You know, you can't give up.
Thank you so much. Thanks for being
Anytime.
here.
Love to
Thanks
come
for being
back.
with IndyTV. This is Dawn, the Barefoot host with IndyTV, talking to Steve Kurtz today. And we'll see you next week.